All right, welcome in everyone. Diving right in here, you guys gave us a really interesting area to explore today. We're looking at work-life balance, but specifically through the lens of Japanese philosophies.
Yeah. When you think about Japan, I think many people would tend to think about, really intense work cultures, long hours at the office. And that's certainly a part of it. But
Yeah.
what I think is really interesting is that, like, woven into the fabric of Japanese culture, thought, are all of these really ancient philosophies that deal with exactly that. How do we manage the demands of life and work and all that? How do we find some sense of balance and really prioritize what matters?
Yeah, and that's exactly our mission in this deep dive. We want to uncover actionable wisdom, practical wisdom
Yeah.
that you can use starting right now to make more room for your personal life, even with all those daily pressures. Now, speaking of those daily pressures, for our listeners out there, especially if you're in your car right now, just a quick thought as you start your journey with us. Before making a lean change, take a moment to really check your mirrors, especially those blind spots. Really be aware of what's happening around you. All right, so let's get into our first philosophy today, Uketamo. It's all about acceptance, meeting those challenges that life throws at us without getting caught up in judgment.
Yeah.
And in the context of today's always-on work culture, that feels super relevant, don't you think?
Absolutely. We all live with this constant barrage of notifications from our phones, emails, messages, always that digital hum in the background. And it can feel like you need to be available all the time. There's this anxiety about missing out on something important.
Right, that FOMO, that fear of missing out, especially in a professional setting. You feel like if you disconnect, even for a little bit, you might miss some big opportunity or face some consequence.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Uketamo offers a different perspective. It encourages us to just accept that work will still be there tomorrow, that email that pops up after hours, the world probably isn't going to end if you wait until the morning to deal with it.
What's really fascinating about this idea of acceptance is how it really can change your perspective. It's acknowledging that we're human and we have limitations, that we weren't designed to be constantly in that response mode. We need time to rest, time to detach and recharge and let our minds actually, recover.
Yeah, I remember when I was working at a big corporation, there was this unspoken expectation that you'd be online all the time. The people who would send those late night emails or were reachable at all hours seemed to be seen as more dedicated. It was like a factor in getting promotions even, and there was a lot of peer pressure to be plugged in all the time. But, trying to embody Uketamo, I made a choice.
Hmm.
I accepted that not being available around the clock, it might mean, maybe my career wouldn't move as quickly. But to me, that was an okay trade-off. I was fully committed during work hours, but outside of that, I drew a hard line. So laptop closed meant no more work communication until the next day.
And that's a great example of putting Uketamo into practice, understanding what's most important to you and accepting the potential consequences of setting those boundaries. Now, while we're on the topic of boundaries, for those listening in their cars, remember that maintaining a safe following distance can really help you react to unexpected situations. Give yourself that extra space and time to react.
Now, running my own business, I have to say it does present a different set of challenges. The temptation to always be working, to maximize every single minute of productivity, it's very real, especially when your income is so directly tied to how much you're producing. But even then, I've found Uketamo to be a good guide. I've had to accept that I can't be operating at 100% all the time, that rest isn't a luxury, but something I really need to do to keep going long term. So I'll get an idea late at night or something, and instead of, jumping on it immediately, I just jot it down and say, okay, I can look at this tomorrow. It can wait.
Yeah, acknowledging that thought and choosing to deal with it later, it allows you to respect those bursts of inspiration without having to sacrifice your personal time for them.
This was really tested this year when I took an 11-day trip to Japan. 11 days. It felt like a huge chunk of time to step away from the business, especially when you're trying to build something. There was definitely some initial resistance there, like, can I really disconnect for that long? But I had to actively accept that taking that break, having that time away was crucial, not just for me personally, but for the business itself in the long run. And honestly, being able to fully detach from work allowed me to really get the most out of that trip and come back with a fresh perspective.
That's really getting to the heart of Uketamo, right? Work is always going to be there. There's always going to be more to do, but our time, our energy, those are limited. Accepting that we need a life outside of work, it empowers us to set those boundaries, to make time for family, our passions, self-care, all of that. And speaking of being mindful and aware, for those still driving out there, a reminder. Intersections can be especially risky, so always double check for cross traffic before you go, even if you have a green light. You just never know what other drivers might be doing. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about our second philosophy for today, Naikan.
Yeah, Naikan. This is a really fascinating practice, a form of self-reflection that's really focused on our relationships and how we show up in those relationships. It involves asking yourself three key questions about a specific person in your life. What have I received from this person? What have I given to this person? And what problems or troubles have I caused this person?
Yeah, and what makes these questions so powerful, even though they seem simple, is that they really shed light on the dynamics of our relationships, especially with the people closest to us. It helps us understand the balance of give and take and forces us to confront maybe some ways that we're, even if it's unintentionally, causing conflict or imbalance.
Right, because when you sit down and honestly answer those questions, it can reveal some uncomfortable truths, right?
Right.
Maybe you realize that your loved ones have been incredibly supportive through thick and thin, always there for you, but you've been so busy with work that you've neglected them in some way. Or you come home, you're physically present, but are you really there emotionally? Are you having those meaningful interactions? And it kind of brings up those tough questions. Are we truly present for our family? Are our kids growing up feeling like we're not really there for them because our minds are always at work?
And what I think is really valuable about Nikon is that it doesn't just end with those initial questions. It encourages you to dig deeper, and it gives you this powerful internal motivation to change your priorities, a real strong reason to disconnect from work and really invest in your relationships. And speaking of investing in safety, for our listeners on the road, remember, fatigue can have a huge impact on your driving. So if you're feeling tired, pull over to a safe place and just take a break.
Even just practicing Naikan for a short time every day has been really grounding for me. For example, my wife and I, we have this dedicated time together every evening to connect. We might watch something together, just chat over tea, that kind of thing. And honestly, the temptation is always there to let work creep into that time. Oh, I could just get a few more things done. But then I stop and ask myself those Nikon questions. Am I truly giving my wife my full attention? Am I really listening when she's talking? Or is my mind still stuck on work stuff? And the answers, they remind me that achieving things professionally, it shouldn't come at the expense of my family, who are ultimately the most important thing in my life.
And it's that regular self-reflection that makes Nikon so powerful. It's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing practice to help you stay aligned with what truly matters and prevent work from slowly taking over those precious moments.
It's not just about being physically present either, right? It's about being mentally present. You can be in the same room as your loved ones, but if your mind is miles away thinking about work, are you really there? Lycan really prompts me to check in with myself. Am I actually present? And that awareness is the first step to letting go of work when I'm spending time with family.
Absolutely. It takes a conscious effort to do that consistently. Work can pull at you, but Nikon gives you a way to redirect your focus, gently but firmly. And like you mentioned earlier, it really goes hand in hand with Uketamo. When you reflect on how important your family is, you're more likely to set those boundaries between work and personal life and accept that you need to disconnect sometimes. And speaking of being aware of your surroundings, a reminder to all our drivers out there, be extra careful of pedestrians and cyclists, especially in urban areas and crosswalks. Always remember to yield the right of way. Now, moving on to our third philosophy.
Ovi, Asobi.
Yeah, Asobi is all about the importance of play. It's the reminder that play isn't just for kids, it's essential for adults too. It helps us relax, be more creative, and just generally feel better.
And it feels like something that we so easily dismiss, right? Our culture values being busy, being productive. So often play can seem almost frivolous, like we should be spending that time on something more useful, more goal-oriented.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught in that mindset that every moment has to be optimized for some kind of tangible result. But Asobi challenges that, reminding us that there's inherent value in play itself, in the joy and the energy it brings. And speaking of valuable tips, for those driving, before you even start your car, make sure you adjust your mirrors correctly so you have the best possible visibility.
One of the things that really stood out to me when I was in Japan was seeing Asobi woven into everyday life, even in a culture known for its strong work ethic. You see those bustling gaming arcades, gachapon machines everywhere, people of all ages actively engaging with these forms of entertainment. They make time for it, even with their busy schedules.
You know that image you described of someone in Tokyo stopping by a capsule toy machine after a long day at work? That really sums up the spirit of Asobi. It's a little moment of escape, a chance to just let go of the to-do lists, the work stress, and just do something fun, lighthearted, a kind of mental refresh.
Even just seeing people on the subway, reading manga or watching anime, all ages, during their commutes, it's another example of how play can be a part of daily life, a way to recharge.
And it's important to say, Asobi doesn't mean you have to live in a certain place or adopt certain hobbies. It's really personal. It's about figuring out what you find playful, what gives you energy. It could be anything, a hobby you love, playing sports with friends, being creative through art, music, writing. You define what play means for you. Now, for our drivers, remember, use your turn signals well in advance to let other drivers know what you're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, asobi often means reading fiction or maybe watching an episode of anime before I go to bed. It might sound simple, but it really taps into that childlike sense of wonder and joy. It's a way to detach from those adult responsibilities for a little while. And honestly, that little bit of playfulness before sleep, it's surprisingly restorative.
Yeah, and what's great is Asobi doesn't require huge chunks of time. Even just 15 minutes a day dedicated to something that makes you feel like a kid again, that can have a big positive impact on your stress levels and how you feel overall.
It's that reminder that we're not just defined by our jobs. We need that lightness, that joy in our lives.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about how we can actually make these philosophies a part of our daily lives. You mentioned this idea of the third space, right?
Right. The idea of a third space is a really practical way to incorporate Uketamo, Naikan, and Asobi into our routines. It's like a transition zone, a buffer that helps us consciously shift gears between the demands of work and our personal lives.
And I think a perfect example of a third space that we often don't use well is the commute home from work. So many people, myself included in the past, try to squeeze in more work during that time or just replay the events of the day in their minds, carrying that work energy with them. Now, for those of you driving, a reminder, be super cautious in school zones and residential areas. Look out for children, pedestrians, just really be aware of your surroundings.
Exactly. Instead of trying to be productive during your commute, what if we use that time to mentally close the book on the workday and prepare to be fully present at home? It's about creating that mental distance.
So like instead of immediately checking work emails on the train ride home, you could listen to music that has nothing to do with work, or maybe a podcast that gets you thinking about something completely different. It's like telling your mind, okay, work is done for now, it's time to transition.
Exactly. Anything that helps your mind detach from those work thoughts and worries. You mentioned that you used to listen to the 99% Invisible podcast during your commute. That's a great example, something that's interesting and engaging, but completely separate from your work life.
And now I find that going to the gym around 4 p.m. works really well as a third space for me. When I'm working out, I need to focus on what I'm doing. Can't really be worrying about spreadsheets or deadlines when I'm in the middle of a set.
Yeah.
It forces my mind to be present, and it really helps push those work thoughts aside.
That's a great point. Any activity that requires your full attention can be a really effective third space. So to wrap things up, we've talked about three important Japanese philosophies. Uketamo, embracing acceptance; Naikan, reflecting on our relationships; and Asobi, the importance of play. And we've discussed how creating a third space can help us incorporate these ideas into our lives and smoothly transition between work and our personal time. Now, as you arrive at your destination, remember to check your surroundings for pedestrians and cyclists before opening your car door. Stay safe out there. And as you go about your day, think about this. How can you create your own third space today? What small act of Asobi could you fit into your evening? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.